In Washington, D.C., a notorious drug gang has cast a dark shadow over an entire neighborhood. Witnesses either vanish or are silenced through violence, and despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the number of victims continues to climb. The drug trade thrives, turning once ordinary streets into a battleground. The FBI realizes that ordinary tactics won't be enough. They need a master plan to dismantle the ruthless group known throughout the city as the K Street Crew. During the 1990s, America's war on drugs was in full force, and major cities bore the brunt of the bloodshed. Violent gangs fought mercilessly to secure their territory and maintain control. My name is Jim Carlster, a former FBI director in New York. When Washington, D.C. was hit by a wave of escalating gang violence, both the Metropolitan Police and the FBI launched a counterattack. Using advanced surveillance technology and new, stricter laws, they aimed to dismantle the gangs from the inside out. D.C. is known for its monuments, museums, and as the heart of American justice, home to the Supreme Court, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Yet, even the nation's capital isn't immune to crime. On March 22, 1991, 20-year-old Wendy York was out running errands. When she returned home, she discovered a horrifying scene. She shared an apartment with her cousins, Terita and Teresa Lucas. As she stepped inside, she saw Tia lying on the couch, her face covered in blood. Wendy panicked, bolting out of the apartment and calling 911. Within minutes, the D.C. Metropolitan Police arrived. Inside the home, officers found Teresa Lucas dead, executed with a gunshot to the head. In the bedroom, they discovered another body. The second victim was Teresa's sister, also shot in the head. Miraculously, a small child remained unharmed near her mother's lifeless body. "Sir, there's a baby here. He's moving," one of the officers confirmed. As they secured the crime scene, another unsettling discovery was made. Another infant, traumatized but physically unhurt, was found nearby. It became clear that both children had been left alone with the corpses for hours. Shortly after, the victim's mother, Renee Brown, arrived. The entire building was surrounded by police, and she was not allowed inside. My mind was racing. I tried to push through, but the officers held me back, Renee recalled. I kept saying, "That's my home. I need to go in." It was the worst day of my life, something I will never forget. The crime scene investigation yielded little in terms of physical evidence. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransacked belongings, and no valuables taken. Nothing seemed to point to a robbery, leading investigators to suspect that the victims knew their killer. Detectives asked Renee Brown to inspect the apartment, hoping she would notice anything unusual. Still deep in grief, she was determined to assist in any way she could. As she surveyed the bedrooms, something caught her attention. The first thing I noticed was that a framed photograph had disappeared from Teresa's wall. Just last night, it was hanging right there, she pointed out. The empty frame remained, but the image was missing. The picture was of Teresa's boyfriend, Sam Carson. Puzzled, Renee informed the detectives. "I wondered why it was gone," she said. "We checked behind the house and even dug through the trash, but it wasn't there." That's when I told them, "Whoever took that photo is the killer." Detectives immediately sought out Sam Carson for questioning. "Do you know that your girlfriend was murdered last night?" they asked. Carson appeared shocked, but despite being a person of interest, the police had nothing concrete to tie him to the crime. "Would you be willing to come down to the station for a few questions?" With no solid evidence to hold him, authorities had no choice but to let him go. Meanwhile, they canvassed the neighborhood, hoping someone had seen or heard something that could crack the case. But their efforts hit a wall. "What do you want, officer?" one resident asked, eyeing them suspiciously. "We're investigating the murder of 2 young women. Did you hear any gunshots?" "No, I don't know anything about that." A double homicide had taken place, but no one in the neighborhood was willing to talk. Fear hung thick in the air. Residents knew that speaking up could mean signing their own death warrant. The brutality of the murder sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community, reaching even the highest levels of the FBI. Special Agent Vince L., an experienced undercover operative, was particularly disturbed by the case. "It was horrific," he later recalled. The police had almost no leads. They were doing everything they could, but without witnesses, they had nothing to go on. Without testimony, there was no suspect. Without a motive, the crime made no sense. And without evidence, the case would soon become just another unsolved murder in a city drowning in violence. The epicenter of this chaos was Greenleaf Gardens, a low-income housing complex in the heart of K Street. The drug trade had turned the neighborhood into a war zone, making it one of the most dangerous places in Washington, D.C. Detective Steve Kastner, a veteran officer, remembered when things took a turn for the worse. Back in '85 and '86, it got really bad. Crime skyrocketed, and the murder rate shot through the roof, he explained. At first, it was just about who was making the most money. But soon, armed robberies became a way of life. Suburban drug users contributed to the growing wealth of the K Street crew, as buyers from outside the city poured in, desperate to get their hands on crack cocaine. The economic situation in the area was grim, leaving many young men with an impossible choice: stay in school and struggle, or make thousands of dollars a day selling drugs. How do you convince a 15-year-old to go to class when he can make $1,000 a day pushing crack? Kastner said, suddenly, kids who had nothing were walking around with brand-new clothes, jewelry, and even their own cars. With millions of dollars in profits at stake, dealers became more ruthless. Turf wars erupted. Boundaries were drawn, and crossing into the wrong block could mean death. "What's up? Get lost," one dealer warned a rival. As the battles for territory intensified, the community became trapped in the crossfire. Metro Homicide Detective Tony Brigadini recalled just how dangerous things became. The statistics were staggering, he said. This wasn't some distant, forgotten neighborhood. It was right next to the government buildings in southwest D.C. The crime rate in that small area was unbelievable. To combat the rising violence, the FBI and the D.C. Metropolitan Police launched Task Force Safe Streets. Their mission? To reclaim a neighborhood that had essentially become a war zone. FBI agents began patrolling the streets, gathering intelligence on gang activity. "Do you recognize any of these women?" One agent asked a resident while investigating the Lucas sisters' murders. But the response was always the same. People were too afraid to speak. If you go door to door, trying to talk to folks, within 3 minutes, everyone in the neighborhood knows the cops are around, an agent explained. Frustrated by the lack of cooperation, law enforcement changed their strategy. "We started following people to work and approaching them outside the neighborhood," said one investigator. "That way, they knew they were safe, and their neighbors wouldn't see them talking to us." Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. Residents finally started sharing what they knew about the men who ran the streets. One name kept coming up: Vincent Hill. He was a ruthless leader of the K Street crew, and his only rule was fear. If you pissed him off, even just a little, he'd grab a baseball bat, a hammer, or whatever was nearby and beat the hell out of you. One witness revealed Hill's money and brutality made him untouchable. He had absolute control over his gang, and people feared him so much that they followed his orders without question. Vincent Hill was a tyrant, an informant told the FBI. But at the same time, people admired him. He had money, he wore nice clothes, and he drove fancy cars. That's what the kids looked up to. And if you wanted to make money, he was your ticket in. The problem? Selling crack cocaine carried severe prison sentences, and law enforcement was cracking down hard. Hill, however, was always one step ahead. Before the FBI could take down the K Street crew for selling crack, the gang made a strategic shift. They switched to selling marijuana instead. They knew crack meant serious time behind bars, said one investigator. But weed? That was just a minor offense. They'd get off easy. And it worked. Suburban buyers still flooded in, money still poured into Hill's pockets, and the risk of long prison sentences disappeared overnight. This was huge, an undercover officer explained. People were making $3,000 to $5,000 a day just selling weed. The switch to marijuana forced the task force to adapt. The dealers had become more brazen, and law enforcement needed a new plan. We'd approach them, and they'd shove bags of weed right in our faces. $20 for a dime bag. "You buying or not?" one agent recalled. As soon as they realized they were dealing with undercover cops, they'd scatter, abandoning their stash until the coast was clear. Minutes later, they'd be back in the same spot, fully restocked. The money was flowing, but as the profits grew, so did the violence. On August 29th, 1992, a tragic case of mistaken identity resulted in 3 young men being shot. Travis Ross was gunned down immediately. His 2 friends barely survived. The police questioned the survivors, hoping for leads, but they got the same response as before. "I don't know who did it. I didn't see anything." Their silence made sense. Word on the street was that the K Street crew had already killed over a dozen people for cooperating with the police, and nobody wanted to be next. By 1995, the violence in Washington, D.C. was spiraling out of control. The K Street crew had turned their neighborhood into a death zone, and anyone who dared to cross them ended up in a body bag. The FBI and the D.C. Metropolitan Police were determined to bring them down, but without witnesses willing to testify, their options were limited. Then Bruce Spencer got shot. Spencer was hit 5 times in broad daylight, yet somehow he survived. More importantly, he was willing to talk. "The guy who shot me? I know who it was," he told investigators. Recognizing the danger he was in, law enforcement immediately placed him under protective custody at a local hospital. While Spencer recovered, Special Agent Vince L. and his team hit the streets, determined to track down his shooter. But the moment they set foot in Greenleaf Gardens, they realized just how deep this war ran. Standing before them was Vincent Hill himself, the man who ruled K Street with an iron fist. Hill didn't flinch. Instead, he made sure they got the message. "You're all dead," he sneered. "And so is your buddy in the hospital." Hill wasn't bluffing. By the time word got back to Spencer, his confidence crumbled. "I can't do this," he told the detectives. "I won't testify. I want out." Another case, another witness silenced by fear. The frustration within the task force Safe Streets was reaching its peak. This was the second time we had a witness ready to bring them down, only from the back out. One agent admitted, "We were running out of chances." And Greenleaf Gardens? It remained firmly in the grip of the K Street crew. It was clear that going after individual members for drug charges wasn't enough. They had to take down the entire organization at once. That's when the RICO Act, a federal law designed to prosecute organized crime, became their secret weapon. If we could prove that the K Street crew was an organized criminal enterprise, we could charge every single member as part of a larger criminal conspiracy, Agent L. explained. The FBI reviewed years' worth of unsolved cases, looking for any murder, robbery, or assault that could be linked to the gang. "We were digging through files 10 years old. Try to find anything that would help us build a rock-solid case," said Detective Tony Brigadini. They weren't just after drug charges anymore. They were connecting the gang to murders, kidnappings, and armed robberies. But it still wasn't enough. They needed inside intelligence on the crew's daily operations. So they went undercover. A vacant apartment overlooking K Street became the FBI's base of operations. The landlord, desperate to rid his building of drug dealers and violence, handed them the keys free of charge. "We rigged the place with cameras, long-range lenses, everything," one agent recalled. "We sat there, watching everything unfold in real time." Over the weeks, a pattern emerged. They learned that most of the drug deals happened in cars. Buyers would drive up, hand over cash, and speed off before anyone could notice. That's when the agents came up with a bold plan. They decided to go undercover and buy directly from the gang. A beat-up construction truck became their undercover vehicle. "We wanted it to look like a regular work truck," an agent explained. "We even loaded it with toolboxes to make it seem legit. Hidden inside, surveillance cameras and microphones. But buying from low-level dealers wasn't enough. They needed to get to the top. To Vincent Hill himself, the FBI placed 5 undercover teams across the neighborhood, waiting for the right moment to make contact. "No one moves until I say so," Agent L told his team. Then it happened faster than anyone expected. On their very first attempt, the agent spotted Vincent Hill standing on the corner, surrounded by his men. "What do you need?" Hill asked, walking up to the truck. "Couple of bags of weed," the undercover officer replied. Hill nodded. $50. The deal went down in under 30 seconds. They had Vincent Hill on camera, personally selling drugs. At first, the FBI couldn't believe their luck. Usually it takes weeks or months to work your way up to the boss, one agent explained. We met him in 30 seconds. But they knew one small deal wouldn't be enough to lock Hill away for good. So over the next 6 months, they continued buying from him, over and over again. They increased the amount each time, building a strong case that Hill ran the entire operation. He was in control of everything, one agent recalled. If you wanted to buy, you had to go through him. Then one night, everything nearly fell apart. After completing another buy, the agent started to drive away when Hill suddenly flagged him down. One of his men had recognized the driver. He says, "Your buddy's a cop," Hill said, staring them down. "I know you're good, but if he's a cop, they'll kill you both." The agents played it cool, nodding and driving off. "They didn't chase us, but that was our warning shot," one agent later admitted. A week later, when the FBI returned to buy more drugs, Hill's attitude had completely changed. "I got nothing for you," he said coldly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The FBI was burned. Hill had figured them out, and now they were out of time. After 6 months infiltrating the crew, they still didn't have enough evidence to take down Hill for more than drug dealing. The problem? Even if they arrested him, he'd only get 8 to 10 years, and once he was out, the gang would keep running. If they wanted to bury the K Street crew for good, they needed something bigger. They needed proof of murder. And soon, a terrified young woman would give them exactly what they needed. In 1995, a young woman made a decision that would change everything. Chrissy Gladden, a 19-year-old single mother, had spent her entire life surrounded by the violence of the K Street crew. She knew they ruled her neighborhood with an iron fist, and she knew the cost of speaking out. But she also knew she couldn't keep living in fear. Chrissy went to police and told them what she had overheard. Jerome Martin and Antonio Knight were responsible for a drive-by shooting. She hadn't seen the attack herself, but she had heard Martin bragging about it. She didn't even know the victim's name. When investigators connected her statement to an unsolved murder, everything clicked into place. A few months earlier, Travis Ross had been shot and killed in what the police believed was a case of mistaken identity. 2 of his friends had survived the attack, but neither of them had been willing to talk. Now, they had a witness. Chrissy was scared. She knew what happened to people who testified against the K Street crew, but she also knew she had to do something. She agreed to testify on one condition. The FBI had to put her in the witness protection program. Special Agent Vince L. understood her fear, but he also knew how much her testimony was worth. He promised that she would be safe, that she would have a new identity, a new home, and a new life. Chrissy wasn't alone. 2 other women also agreed to testify, but only if they were guaranteed protection. The FBI kept their word. Chrissy was relocated. The gang had no idea where she was. She was told to stay quiet, not to tell anyone where she had moved, and never to bring people to her new home. If she followed the rules, she would be safe. Her testimony changed everything. Jerome Martin and Antonio Knight were arrested and charged with murder. The case was solid. The prosecution was confident. In the week leading up to the trial, the FBI prepared Chrissy. She was nervous, but she was ready. She wasn't an eyewitness, but she could connect the dots. Then, for days before she was set to take the stand, the FBI got a call. Chrissy Gladden was dead. She had gone to a party at the home of Antonio Knight's girlfriend. On her way home, 2 masked gunmen ambushed her and opened fire. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. She had been shot multiple times. Detective Steve Kastner was one of the first on the scene. Despite the number of people at the party, no one had seen anything. No one would talk. The message was clear. Talking to the police was a death sentence. Agent Vince L. took it personally. He had promised Chrissy she would be safe. He had given her his word. Now she was gone. Despite her murder, the trial against Martin and Knight moved forward. But without her, the case was in shambles. Some of the remaining witnesses refused to testify. The few who did were so shaken that their statements were inconsistent. The defense tore them apart. Martin and Knight walked free. The K Street crew had won. For law enforcement, it was a devastating loss. It was one thing to lose a case. It was another to lose a witness. Chrissy had trusted them, and they had failed her. But if the gang thought the FBI would give up, they were wrong. The task force doubled down. They weren't just going to arrest the K Street crew. They were going to destroy them. The opportunity came less than a month later. Robert Bucci Smith, a high-ranking member of the crew, was arrested for drug trafficking. The FBI saw an opening. They told him what he was facing, serious prison time, and if they linked him to any violent crimes, he'd never see the outside of a cell again. Smith cracked. He told the FBI everything. The gang had hired private investigators to track down anyone who planned to testify against them. They used public records and court documents to find their enemies before they could take the stand. He gave up names, dates, details. He confirmed what the FBI had always suspected. Chrissy's murder wasn't random. She had been executed. But that wasn't all. Smith also gave them the key to solving a triple homicide. Back in 1996, Ryan Pierce, a drug dealer from Las Vegas, had come to D.C. and won big at the casinos. His winnings caught the attention of the K Street crew. Vincent Hill and his men decided to rob him. On November 17, 1996, they waited outside his home. When Pierce arrived with 3 friends, the gang struck. They stormed inside and demanded the money. Pierce had already deposited his winnings in the bank. There was nothing to steal. That didn't matter. The gang shot him anyway. 2 of his friends were killed on the spot. One woman managed to escape. Thanks to Smith's confession, the FBI finally had enough to tie the K Street crew to a string of murders. They weren't just going to take down Hill and his top men. They were going to bury the entire operation. With Robert Bucci Smith's confession, the FBI had the breakthrough they needed. Now, they weren't just building a case on drug charges. They were linking the K Street crew to multiple murders. But even with Smith's testimony, they needed physical evidence to ensure convictions. One piece came from the triple homicide Smith had described. Investigators analyzed a fingerprint found on a door at the crime scene. When they ran it through the database, it was a perfect match to William Sweeney, one of Hill's top enforcers. That wasn't the only connection. The FBI obtained records from a cell phone used near the crime scene on the night of the murders. It belonged to Sweeney, and the call logs placed him at the exact location at the exact time. With the evidence mounting, the FBI knew they had to move fast. In April 1997, they arrested Sweeney, but they kept quiet about what they knew. Instead, they booked him for other crimes, hoping to catch him off guard. At first, Sweeney didn't talk. Then, his lawyer handed him a copy of his arrest warrant. That's when he saw it the mysterious, confidential informant had provided evidence against him. Sweeney knew exactly what that meant. Someone inside the K Street crew was talking. 2 months later, Robert Bucci Smith was gunned down in broad daylight. He was shot multiple times, most of the bullets hitting his head. The FBI knew exactly why. They had lost their key witness. For investigators, it felt like Chrissy Gladden's murder all over again. Smith had provided the FBI with enough evidence to finally take down the gang, but now he was dead. His murder sent a chilling message. No one was safe. Even worse, just like Chrissy's killing, nobody in the neighborhood saw anything. Agent Vince L. was livid. "We knew people were out there. We knew people watched it happen," he later said. But no one would talk. Everyone was too scared. With Smith gone, the FBI feared their case would collapse. The K Street crew was known for making witnesses disappear, and now they had just proven it again. The task force faced a tough decision. If they wanted to finish what Smith started, they needed another insider. But who would be willing to talk after 2 key witnesses had been murdered? The answer came in a shocking confession. Before his death, Smith had given up one more name, James Montgomery. Montgomery was a trusted member of the K Street crew. According to Smith, he had been directly involved in multiple killings, including the triple homicide and the murder of Chrissy Gladden. When the FBI arrested Montgomery, they knew he had 2 choices. talk, or spend the rest of his life in prison. It didn't take long. Montgomery confessed to 7 murders. And he didn't stop there. He revealed something that stunned the FBI: the truth about Teresa and Territa Lucas. For years, their murders have remained unsolved. But Montgomery knew exactly what happened. He told them the killer was Sam Carson. In 1991, Carson had hidden a bag of weapons at Teresa Lucas's home. When he went back to retrieve them, they were gone. Teresa told him she had thrown them away to keep her children safe. Carson didn't believe her. He played it cool, acting like it wasn't a big deal. Then, he excused himself to use the bathroom. What Teresa didn't know was that Carson had hidden a gun in there earlier. When he came back out, the calm mask was gone. He pointed the gun at her. "Where are the weapons?" he demanded. "I told you, Sam. They're gone." She tried to de-escalate the situation. She reminded him that her kids were in the house. But Carson didn't care. He shot her in the head. Then he walked into the bedroom, where Territa had just woken up, and shot her too. Before leaving, he wiped down the apartment, removing any fingerprints and stealing a framed photo of himself from the wall. That was why the police never found any forced entry or stolen valuables. Teresa had known her killer. For years, the Lucas murders had been a mystery. But now, thanks to Montgomery's confession, the FBI finally had the truth. And they weren't stopping there. Montgomery also revealed something else: how the K Street crew discovered the undercover agents. The FBI had long suspected that Vincent Hill had figured them out, but they didn't know how. Now they had the answer. According to Montgomery, 2 young girls from a different neighborhood had spotted the undercover officers walking into an FBI office. The moment word reached Hill, he had them followed. One day, after another undercover buy, the agents noticed something strange. "They were watching us," one of the officers later recalled. "We didn't think we had been made, but we were wrong." Hill's men tailed them all the way to the FBI building. From that moment on, Hill knew exactly who they were. The undercover operation was over. Now, the FBI had one goal: bring down the entire K Street crew before they could kill anyone else. With James Montgomery's confession, the FBI had everything they needed to take down the K Street crew for good. They now had confessions, physical evidence, and proof that the gang was responsible for multiple murders, kidnappings, and drug operations. But they knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. They needed to move fast before anyone else ended up dead. The first target was Sam Carson, the man responsible for the murders of Teresa and Territa Lucas. The FBI arrested him and charged him with double homicide. There would be no getting out of this one. Montgomery's testimony, along with new forensic evidence, made sure of that. But Carson wasn't the only one who had blood on his hands. Vincent Hill, the untouchable kingpin of K Street, had run his operation without consequences for years. Now his luck had finally run out. In the summer of 1998, the FBI executed a massive takedown operation, arresting Hill, Jerome Martin, Sean Coates, and other top members of the gang. The federal indictment was devastating. The government wasn't just charging them with drug crimes. They were hitting them with murder, organized crime, conspiracy, and RICO violations. The case against them was ironclad. During the trial, 2 powerful pieces of evidence turned the tide against them. The first, the court allowed video recordings of Chrissy Gladden's statements to be played in front of the jury. Even though she had been murdered, her testimony lived on. The second, the FBI played tapes of Robert Bucci Smith's statements, a voice from beyond the grave, exposing the gang's operations. For years, the K Street crew had silenced witnesses through fear and violence. But now, those very witnesses were helping convict them from beyond the grave. In 2001, the verdicts were handed down. Vincent Hill, Jerome Martin, Sean Coates, Sam Carson, and other key gang members were all convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison. No parole, no second chances. Their reign of terror was finally over. The rest of the crew, dozens of mid-level and street-level dealers, took plea deals, receiving long sentences for their roles in the organization. The FBI and the D.C. Metropolitan Police had finally won the war. The K Street crew was dead. The streets they had once controlled with fear were free again. Special Agent Vince L., who had spent years on the case, reflected on what it all meant. These guys weren't going to stop, he said. This was their life. Selling drugs, robbing, killing. If we hadn't taken them down, they would have kept going forever. It had taken years of undercover operations, surveillance, and countless risks, but in the end, justice prevailed. For the first time in over a decade, the people of Greenleaf Gardens and K Street could finally breathe. The FBI had done more than just lock up criminals. They had given a neighborhood its future back.